Thank you, Eva. Fascinating. Great information. This is going to be a little different style than the first one. This is going to be about as close as you can come to a movie with a PowerPoint. We're going to go through this pretty fast. And I want to give credit to Alan Henningson, our forest silviculturist. We've followed a lot the guidelines of Dale and Wayne Shepard and others. We had an Aspen Research Summit on the forest in 1995 and a follow-up in 2005. And we've learned a lot, but Alan Henningson has been one that's kind of put it on the ground and allowed it to happen. And then our fire people have made a difference too. Paul Rogers is going to have two handouts that go along with this. One is a table of what we've been able to accomplish on the forest, and another one is an article that Darren McAvoy put together in Utah Forest News on Alan Henningson's work and the lessons learned. So hold on to your hats. We're going to go through these and see what we can learn from. So the Fishlake National Forest is located in south central Utah. It's just primarily east of I-15 and mostly on the south side of I-70. We talk about the mountain ranges, often as subsections, and we have a wildland fire use plan in place on the forest. And our present situation is that the aspen do grow there, produce sprouts and suckers vigorously following the fires, harvest, or other treatments. We have fire history to indicate that these historically fires occurred every 20 to 60 years in most of these areas. And many of these areas have not had fire in them in the last 150 to 200 years. Many of our areas are converting from aspen to forest to mixed conifer forest in the absence of fire, and this results in and so here's one size does not fit all, and what I'm telling you is just going to be in contrast to what Edward just explained from the areas in Canada. But where we have our aspen forest there, we may have 1,500 to 2,000 pounds per acre, maybe even a range of 1,000 to 3,000 pounds per acre available under the aspen canopy. When the conifer comes in, once it gets about 20% cover of conifer, even in the understory, that production of the understory forage and vegetation can go down to less than 200 pounds per acre. And so as this happens, we do get a tremendous loss of biodiversity and all the other ecosystems. Deer, elk, sheep, and cattle all relish aspen suckers during certain seasons of the year. Charles K., on a visit there, said we have a situation where we have too many mouths and not enough fire. Livestock were not in these areas historically, and the number of deer and elk were all lower than they are now. So in the past 25 years on the forest, we've managed to have nearly 70,000 acres of aspen acre treated in one way or another. Don't have all of them in this table, but most of them are there, and that's the green page that you have handed out to you, this little summary of that. Timber sales with conifer, well, aspen timber sales, conifer timber sales combined with prescribed fire. We have prescribed fire treatments for wildlife benefit. We have wildfire in certain areas, and we have managed wildfire. That managed wildfire, and 30,000 acres of that 34,000 acres occurred in 2010 with the Twitchell Canyon fire. So for 24 years, we were sitting at about 37,000 acres. And we had one managed fire that was 45,000 acres in size that went where we can maybe have 30,000 acres of aspen respond in that fire. It's a high fire. We estimate that aspen regeneration is good to excellent, and maybe 50 to 60% of the harvested acres, and as high as 70 or 80% on most of our burned areas. These are what some of our landscapes look like with Aspen. This is the north end of Monroe Mountain. The elevation there is about 9,500 feet. We have situations where aspen's being replaced by spruce and subalpine fir. Some places a little Doug fir. Aspen is being replaced by sagebrush, grass, and fir, but at other elevations. This looks at the situation from Monroe Mountain that is characteristic of the aspen being replaced by. Here we have aspen being replaced by sagebrush. Wayne Shepard talks about the aspen regeneration triangle. And successful regeneration is really a function of the hormonal stimulation, the environment, and the protection. Notice that the protection is the foundation of that triangle. To our knowledge, all of the treatments that we have on the Fishlake have produced sufficient numbers of suckers to have restocked the stand. And treatments have been done in every season of the year, including winter harvest. With the growth environment of that triangle, we see clonal differences in response to treatments and sucker production, and also there seems to be a clonal difference, clonal variation in the attraction to and use by animals. For the protection, when protection is needed, it's important to get that protection in place early. Not all areas need protection, and if you have a large enough area treated, that should work. I mentioned earlier that Walt and Dale had suggested that 10 to 20 acres might be big enough. Well, we found that 1,000 acres wasn't big enough in some areas. Wayne talks about manipulation techniques, excellent paper in that Grand Junction proceedings. Doing nothing, commercial harvest, prescribed fire, removal of vegetative competition, protection of regeneration from herbivory, mechanical root stimulation, and regenerating from seed. And I'll give some examples of each as we go through. In doing nothing, where we have settings here where the canopy is coming right down to the ground there, that's a good, healthy situation. In this case, there was something happened here that caused this skirt or this fairy ring, but there's regeneration coming up. In this particular stand, we use this as an example of an aspen stand in proper functioning condition. There's multiple age classes of stems in that stand, and it's doing quite well just like it is. We also may have some situations of doing nothing because here, if we did something, there might be enough pressure to eat out, to graze out all of the aspen unless there's some kind of protection there. Another example here of rings, where we have conifer coming in sometimes at this stage, to the Christmas tree stage or just a little more, it's already beginning to alter the understory production in there. And if we could do some just physical removal of those conifer trees, even with scout troops and youth groups going in and taking some of them out, that might make a difference. And that's a practice that's used on in Utah. We have prescribed fire, and you can see in the foreground the tremendous aspen regeneration that came up after fire. Wayne and Dale were involved with a root study on Monroe Mountain to see if these areas that are converting from aspen to conifer still have the potential for the aspen root system to perform, and they do. And they compared and contrasted stable aspen with seral. This is the Pando clone in the Fishlake Basin. 106 or so thousand acres, 106 acres right there, about 47,000 trees originally. And they did a harvest in there in 1992 and fenced it and have inside the fence. Dale and Charles Kay have put some transects in there to see if the aspen might spread back out into some early areas where it didn't have the protective fence. It's possible to protect areas with a black plastic net and it's out. This is part of that Aspen Research Summit. This is a commercial harvest of about 80 acres of aspen, and you can see a tall fence exclosure right behind there. In this case, it wasn't necessary. It had a low fence, and that's what the Sheep Valley area looked like in 2003 and again in 2006. Excellent stand of aspen coming back. The aspen in Sheep Valley, just on the other side of the hill, is having some pressure, in this case, from livestock. You see that fence line contrast on the right-hand side with the low fence. So where we're having issues in this area, it's not wildlife, it's life. This is White Ledges on Monroe Mountain. This area was harvested. Dale and I drove into it following year. And they did a prescribed burn following the harvest to take out the advanced regeneration of the conifer. We saw 15 to 20,000 suckers per acre in July, and we went back a month later to measure them, and they were all gone. And our biologist sized it up, and he says, well, I think it's about a third deer, a third elk, and a third cow. White Ledges, 1999 and 2006, and we do not have back on that site. Here in the upper left, you see a low fence exclosure. There's not aspen inside that low fence exclosure. You see a high fence exclosure in the lower right in this White Ledges area, and there is not any thing that's keeping that aspen stand from doing well inside that fence. I say in our area, with respect to climate change in aspen, put up a high fence and see how that changes the climate inside. And it's a pressure that we have there from wildlife. Here again, these areas had commercial harvest. Low fences were put in, but the only place where we have successful, and this was a winter harvest, and aspen regeneration did come up, but the only place where we have surviving aspen regeneration is inside of a small high fence. We have other areas where on that same mountain further to the south where a low fence or even no fence at all is adequate to do that. We have some skitter harvest, and in this case, this area wasn't even protected by fence. This is where the social and the economic need to come in, and we need to be able to engage in non-threatening discussions with the game management departments in each of our states, and where we have issues there, we need to do what we can to help work through those issues. There's Tidwell Slope, that same exclosure in 2006. The stand inside the high fence is doing great. We've mechanical harvest, as Dale talked about. This area is probably about a half mile from that picture that I just showed you of the Tidwell Slope exclosure. We have Fee Busby standing in the middle of the stand, absolutely no protection at all. It's just up on a little slope, no fence or anything. Every time I'd go to that stand, I'd see some deer come out of it, but it's doing like it is. We have commercial harvests in other parts of the forest where we've had excellent response. Some of it requires a low fence, some no fence at all. We have harvest and prescribed fires together. I'm just showing you examples of successful regeneration treatment, and you get a sense of potential for these areas to restock the stand following a treatment. A prescribed fire without harvest in 1997 was when the fire occurred. This is down close to Capitol Reef National Park on the east side of the Boulder Mountain, and excellent regeneration in 2005. Another example from that prescribed fire, a different fire at Oak Creek in that same general area. The pre-burn condition right here, and then the fire in 2005 and what it looked like in 2006. Of the Marysville Peak fire in 2005, we had excellent regeneration inside the high fence exclosure. Here's an example from of the Splatter Canyon fire. The burn was in 1960, burned at the top of that ridge, and you can see how well that area looks some 45 years. This is an area of the Bentonson Mill fire in 1958, and Wayne is aging some of those stands. Why I put this in here, this is about the age of those trees that Baker was talking about. They usually didn't find stands over 40 years old, and this is kind of setting. This is more that grindstone flat. The initial treatment was in 1934. This picture was taken in 1995 during the Aspen tour. The Aspen Research Summit. These trees were about 60 years old. The next year, a fire came through and burned that entire exclosure to the ground. We were able to get a crew, prison crew, come in and put the fence back up. But the fire did not, it burned all the way around, but it did not burn through that asbestos stand Aspen that was 60 years old. Probably not going fast enough, but I'm going to tell a story here, because here's another social impact that we deal with. This is the result of the Beaver Mountain area that initially had burned in well, there was a harvest here in the 70s. This is the area of the Bentonson Mill fire, but then they did this harvest in the 1970s for the spruce. And then the Pole Creek fire burned the area in 1996 and burned all around it, burned this island of conifer right there. But where the aspen was coming up, it did not burn. I showed this picture at a presentation in our regional office and got a pretty stiff rebuke afterwards, because I said, if we elevated aspen to the status of tree, would we need to replant these areas to consider them stocked? Because they were going in and planting these aspen areas to conifer. And I stepped on some toes with that, because planting the conifer is an important aspect of our timber program. And so here's within the agency, what is the desire for these areas? And so again, it's a socioeconomic discussion. The conifer will get there on their own sooner or later. But sometimes we're going right out and planting these aspen forests to conifer right after. And then now this is 3 years later, this is 2009. Aspen recovery is excellent. 3 years, some of the aspen sprouts were 10 feet tall. Wisconsin wildfire burned in 2002. These pictures were taken in 2006. We did have in some parts of it, at the lower slopes, a single strand of electric fence right there. So what happened in 5 days that caused that? On the 12th or the 13th, there was a killing frost, the first killing frost, and for whatever reason, the animal use went just like that to the aspen. Fortunately, they ate mostly the foliage. They didn't take them down. We were fortunate to have Dale and Jim Bounds, John Malachek with a group of graduate students there. This is that same area a few years later. So the aspen did recover from that initial browsing and have grown up in the area, and that's what it looks like now in 2006. Skid Row. We have commercial harvest and prescribed fire on Langdon Mountain, where they went in and cut the conifer out, then through there. Excellent response in these areas. However, it takes time to develop. When they took me to this area in the late 90s, right after I got to the Fishlake, they felt that this had been a failure, and they judged the result of the treatment too soon. You need to sometimes give these areas 5 or 10 years to And so sometimes what we really need to do is determine the desired conditions for a particular area. It's actually a social assessment. When we talk about a desired condition or a properly functioning condition, conditions desired by whom and properly functioning, we talk about these 4 C's: commitment, communication, collaboration, cooperation. This is part of what Ray Haddo was talking about in the plenary session. We've got to be able to talk and work together on things. Little aside, Ted and Jan live in the suburbs. Ted gets home from the office, sets his briefcase on the floor, notices that Jan's working on a crossword puzzle. Jan says, "What has 3 letters and is a female sheep?" Ted says, "You." And that's how the fight began. Sometimes it's just so easy to walk in the middle of something, and here we had this kind of a social interaction going on the mountain, Marysvale Peak Fire. This is the regional office silviculturist and the district ranger talking about whether they're going to put a fence up and who's going to pay for it. And that particular setting right there was a $100,000 discussion. The fence went up. We need to use adaptive management. We need to plan. We need to have action. We need to monitor. Sometimes that monitoring doesn't need to be a lot of details. You can often monitor with photos. You need to evaluate. So recommendations, where we have mixed conifer forest with scattered aspen, that in many cases has the highest priority for using treatments to restore forest health and sustaining functioning aspen systems. We need to take action now and make actions large, and consider if you're having the pressure from ungulates, doing treatments 500 to 1,000 acres in size. Take that action. Aspen roots will generally produce suckers when the stand is treated. Protection is essential in many situations before success occurs, and we need to prioritize treatments in stands where conifers are replacing aspen. Wait for nature to treat other areas. So we hope that we can have some excellent aspen settings in our landscapes. I think that we need to find opportunities to have dialogues with groups. We're having collaborations on Monroe Mountain now. Paul may say something about that in his presentation. I would encourage all of you to be actively engaged in connecting with your larger communities and doing what you can to help them appreciate the value of their diverse ecosystems out there and to sustain those that are biologically diverse. Thank you for your time. I don't know if there's a time for
Yeah, there's time for one question.
Yes.
When you say make your actions large, like 1,000 acres, and you've listed in some cases where cattle grazing or ungulates, so what's the advantage of the large disturbance when you've got a variety of agents that might make a difference in regeneration?
In most cases, a treatment of that size, unless you have really unusual ungulate pressure, that would be sufficiently large to disperse the pressure so that they wouldn't concentrate on a small area. Does that help? Okay. Thank you.